Good evening, I'm Ces Oreña-Drilon.
I'm Pauline Verzosa.
And I'm Shawn Yao.
The big stories tonight. As expected, the education sector gets the lion's share of the proposed national coffers for next year. What's notable, though, is zero budget in 2026 for the Ayuda para sa Kapos ang Kita or AKAP program.
And the House of Representatives begins its investigation into flood control initiatives in Metro Manila. As it turns out, there are multiple dredging projects in NCR that remain unfinished after several months.
And a Chinese fighter jet flew alongside and even under a Philippine Coast Guard plane out on patrol. The PCG said this is the first time that a military jet intercepted their flight this year.
It's the prerogative of the House to pull from certain agencies that haven't been utilizing their funds.
We really see the value of AKAP. Ang dami pong natutulungan.
Wala po yung AKAP sa budget ng DSWD for next year.
It's the largest national budget to date. A record 6.793 trillion pesos of proposed government spending was formally submitted to Congress today. This National Expenditure Program, or NEP, is 7.4% higher than this year's budget. It is equivalent to 22% of the country's gross domestic product. As required by the Constitution, the education sector is getting the lion's share of the coffers at over 1 trillion pesos, with DepEd getting almost 928 billion. This is an increase of almost 20% from 2025's General Appropriations Act. Rounding up the top 10 departments getting a huge share of the national budget are Public Works, Health, Defense, Interior and Local Government, Agriculture, Social Welfare, Transportation, the Judiciary, and Labor and Employment. In his message during the ceremonial NEP turnover in Malacanang, President Bongbong Marcos underscored the need to invest in infrastructure and people. He said the Philippines is on track with its agenda for prosperity and is poised to be a leader among nations in the Asia-Pacific region despite challenges. Marcos urged Congress to swiftly enact this budget. Meanwhile, House leaders have decided to begin formal deliberations on the 2026 budget 2 weeks earlier. Speaker Martin Rmaldez promises key reforms in discussions this year to ensure transparency. These include the removal of the small committee formed to collate institutional amendments to the budget. For his part, House Majority Leader Sandro Marcos said he will not allow the passage of a budget that will deviate too far from the National Expenditure Program.
In the coming weeks, we will review every page of the Net Expenditure Program, guided by one question. Makakabuti ba ito sa ating mga kababayan? If yes, we will support it. If not, we will work to make it better.
It's the prerogative of the House to pull from certain agencies that haven't been utilizing their funds. Ibig sabihin, binigay ka ng 10 pesos. Kung 5 pesos lang ginamit mo sa isang taon, edi ba't ka namin bibigyan ng 10 pesos na naman kung hindi mo lang igagastos? Ilagay na lang namin sa ibang ahensya na may kaya na gumastos ng ganong klaseng pondo.
There is no funding for the Ayuda para sa Kapos ang Kita or AKAP program in the proposed 2026 National Expenditure Program. Budget Secretary Amina Pangandaman explained that they did not request funding for House Speaker Martin Rmaldez's pet cash aid program. And that's because AKAP still has remaining funds from 2025. Besides, Pangandaman said, the government has, quote, limited fiscal space.
Wala po yung AKAP sa budget ng DSWD for next year. May natitira pa pong pondo for 2025 and like I mentioned a while ago, we receive a total of 10 trillion pesos na proposal from agencies. And given our limited fiscal space, hindi pa po muna natin siya sinama.
This is the second consecutive time that the DBM did not allocate funding for AKAP in the NEP. Last year, the Senate removed 39 billion pesos from AKAP in the proposed General Appropriations Bill, but it was still partially restored during BICAM deliberations. AKAP is a DSWD social program where individuals earning below minimum wage are given a one-time cash assistance of up to 5,000 pesos. Question is, will the House fight for AKAP's funding?
I'll also have to confer with my colleagues. We really see the value of AKAP. We've been seeing how it's been helpful to many of our constituencies. Ang dami pong natutulungan, lalo na po yung near minimum income wage earners.
Meantime, the Senate has adopted a resolution to make the national budget process more transparent and accountable. And the upper chamber wants to begin with the 2026 budget. Senate Concurrent Resolution Number 4, sponsored by Finance Committee Chair Sherwin Gachalan, mandates live streaming budget proceedings, posting all budget-related documents online, and providing easy-to-read matrices of changes. The resolution was approved during the Chamber's plenary session earlier today, following 3 days of floor discussions. The measure requires the publication of documents from agency submissions and public hearing reports to the final General Appropriations Bill in accessible formats and local language translations. Senators Gachalan and Ping Lacson have agreed that the names of lawmakers behind specific amendments will not appear automatically in the documents, but must be disclosed if any senator seeks clarification. The resolution will also compel legislators proposing amendments to identify funding sources to speed up deliberations.
Part of the solution, as well as appeal to our colleagues who wish to submit amendments, is to assist the committee to look for sources for those amendments as well. To hasten the budget deliberations as well as budget process, I appeal to our colleagues who will later on give their amendments to also assist the committee to look for sources as well, so that those sources can be a potential source.
We agree that when any of our colleagues will seek clarification on particular insertions or realignments or amendments, then the chairman of the Finance Committee will divulge the identity or identities of the proponents of the amendments on the floor to make it of record.
Currently, only 2 budget documents are publicly available, the National Expenditure Program and the General Appropriations Act. Gachalan says the resolution will ensure that every peso is protected, properly spent, and aligned with national priorities. The resolution was signed by all 24 senators before it was brought to the floor.
And joining us tonight to weigh in on the proposed 2026 national budget is UP School of Economics Assistant Professor and columnist JC Punongbayan. Welcome to the Big Story. May I call you JC? JC,
yes, of course. Good evening, ladies.
Well, it's still early days, of course, and this budget is very, very thick. But what is your initial impression of this proposal?
Yes, so I've had the chance to actually go over quickly some of the more important budget documents submitted today. And apparently, for example, there's still a huge fund for unprogrammed appropriations. Remember that this was a big issue last year in the 2025 budget because many budget allocations were put in unprogrammed or unfunded appropriations. In other words, these are line items in the budget that cannot be spent on without extra revenues collected by the government. So the problem is that in the 2026 budget proposal, unlaki, there's still a huge chunk of the funds of the budget that's still in the unprogrammed appropriations. So it seems that we haven't learned our lessons from last year. And then I've also got to look at the infrastructure budget. So when you look at the National Expenditure Program, they kind of reduced the budget allocation for flood control projects compared to the budget for this year, and also expanded some of the budget for railways because many projects have been delayed already. But the problem is that this happens every year. So I'm worried about the further deliberations and how the budget will change further, especially with the BICAM.
Then this falls squarely on the DBM. Why still provide for this unprogrammed expenditures?
Exactly. So we have to scrutinize not just the lawmakers themselves who deliberate on the budget, but even as early as now, even in the first stage of the budget process, with the budget being proposed by the executive, because there seems to be some agreement or some quid pro quo between the executive and the legislature as well. So it seems this is part of an, well, I hate to say that it's a syndicate or something something so bad, but there's a pattern that you can see
Nagkakasunduan na
from the
sila na may
budget.
ganun talaga. We give you this leeway to add what you wish, something like that.
Exactly. So when you look at the flood control projects, for example, you will notice from the first budget of the Marcos administration, they do not reduce the amounts from the previous year's allocations. So what they do is either they match the previous year's allocations for flood control or increase that at the level of the NEP. And then it balloons once the budget deliberations begin and with the BICAM. So in other words, hindi lumiliit yung mga infrastructure projects, especially for flood control and for road networks. Kasi ito yung mga favorite na mga, na mga lawmakers natin. And of course, in cahoots with many contractors.
Well, but the zero budget for ayuda somehow sends a signal also na are they being somehow, is this a small smack on them, on the hand?
Yes, well, I think they got a lot of heat with all of the ayuda budget, especially in the 2025 budget. But you have to note that they kind of enjoyed already the spoils of the ayuda this year because it is an election year. So they got to disburse lots of funds in the past year. So I guess they're trying to rein in because it's not an election year in 2026. So there's not so much need for ayuda. So they can afford to be performative and say that there's no budget for AKAP, for example. But we have to note that it's not just AKAP. There's so many other programs. For example, AIX, you have the medical assistant for indigent and financially incapacitated patients, the TUPAD, and many other things that have been co-opted by lawmakers themselves. So we have to watch out for all of that as well.
How about PhilHealth? Did you get to check?
I haven't yet checked, but again, we have to watch out for, remember that the subsidies for PhilHealth were eliminated entirely for the 2025 budget. I'm not sure, I haven't really looked into it. I was just poring over the infra aspect of it. But yeah, we have to watch out for that because, of course, there's a Supreme Court case right now that hasn't been decided yet. But yeah, there are a number of court cases right now that pertain to the budget, and in my opinion, these need to be settled as soon as possible because it's another budget cycle, and we're talking about billions of pesos that could be potentially wasted.
All right, what about the 5 transparency measures put forth by no less than Speaker Martin Rmaldez earlier? JC, I hope you caught that. He was, of course, proposing live streaming the whole process, involving the private sector as well as civil service organizations for their inputs, strengthened oversight, things like that. Are you hopeful that this is enough to curb, any magic that happens somewhere beyond public eyes?
Well, yes, it's a step in the right direction, but we have to watch out for the horse trading that happens before the BICAM actually starts. Because as we know, the lawmakers talk between themselves, the House leadership, the Senate as well. There are backdoor negotiations in the allocations for region-specific projects, for example, that are not necessarily going to be transparent once you live stream the actual BICAM meeting. So in other words, much of the interesting stuff actually happens off cam, if you will. So we need to kind of demand that the lawmakers actually go well beyond live streaming these events and actually provide us with, if possible, the details of the individual projects and what they intend to do with the budget of these projects.
I don't know, JC, if you caught Senator Sherwin Gachalan. He's now, of course, the Senate Finance Committee chair, and he made some proposals also of his own. One of which is to digitize the entire thing. So he's saying now we only see the bill and then the final product, but everything in the middle, we don't really get eyeballs on. So he wants to put all of that online, and hopefully, like, there's people like you guys who will pore over each and every page, right? Will that be enough, you think, to at least triangulate or extrapolate where things went wrong and where things were added?
Yes, that will help, especially because of, for example, the budget approved by the House that's transmitted to the Senate, for example, and reconciled with the BICAM. The problem is, as you alluded to, all of these are in PDFs. There's no Excel sheet that can be easily examined. So it's a real constraint for everyone who wishes to scrutinize the budget. But I think beyond that, we need to also, as much as possible, look at how the budget evolves as frequently as possible, because many of the changes happen, for example, in the budget deliberations, and also the BICAM itself. I'm just a bit worried that maybe when all of these documents, for example, the BICAM version of the budget, are published, many of the things that we need to watch out for have already been decided between the lawmakers. So in other words, it's too late for people to actually scrutinize or call out all of these things, because the BICAM happens maybe in November of every year, and then the signing of the budget happens in around December. So things are moving fast, and I'm not quite sure that that's enough time for people, for ordinary people like ourselves, to actually scrutinize and debate transparency.
Well, JC, as of June 2025, the national government's total outstanding debt stands at 16.75 trillion. And for next year's budget, almost 978 billion is being allocated for debt servicing. In your opinion, how sustainable is that in terms of debt repayment? And what are the risks also associated with that?
Well, it's beginning to be alarming, to be honest, for economists, because beyond the absolute level of the debt, what we're looking at, or what we're worried about, would be the ratio of the debt to GDP, or otherwise known as the debt to GDP ratio. And as of June, because the latest GDP figures have been released, it's now up to 63.1%, which is higher than 62% back in March. So in other words, the debt to GDP ratio has been inching up actually in the past couple of months at a rather alarmingly fast rate. So we have to watch out for this, because I think the debt now stands at 17 trillion pesos. A large part of it would be domestic debt. But as the Budget Secretary mentioned earlier in your report, there's very limited fiscal space. The deficit is about 1.5 trillion pesos last year, and that could be the same this year, or even more. So unless the government, so that kind of explains why the government is so eager to tax as many goods as possible without incurring the ire of Filipinos. What that signals is that there are in desperate need for money, but at the same time, I think one way to save on money would be to actually be prudent in spending. However, the flood control projects are still there, the road networks are still there. We haven't learned our lesson. It's more or less similar to what has happened last year, but we'll have to see how the BICAM actually.
Well, there are other ways to control floods than building infrastructure. It seems to be the favorite solution. But anyway, let's go to education as a percentage of GDP, and it has, is it like about 6%, wherein we want really the money to make a difference in the education sector? So,
exactly. So even if the government now allocates the lion's share on education, remember, number one, that there's an issue from last year, because they kind of justify, because when you look at the combined budgets of DepEd, CHED, and TESDA, it still came short of the budget of DPWH. So in other words, they really poured money into DPWH last year, so much that it's more than 1 trillion pesos. And that kind of exceeded a bit the combined budget of those three big agencies. So what they did is they included in the budget, I guess they did a search, a control F search of all the institutes and schools, and then combined all the budgets there so that they can justify that education still has the, or still commands the largest share of the budget. Exactly. But we have to watch out for that again this year. And remember that this is also part of the one of the court cases. I think someone wants to clarify with the Supreme Court, how do we actually define the education budget or the share of education in the budget, because there's no hard and fast rule for that. But at any rate, we still definitely need to spend more on education, specifically because our scores in math, reading, and comprehension and science are quite low. And based on studies, the lower you spend on a per pupil basis, the lower the scores you can expect as well. So we need to focus especially on spending per pupil, because the student size or the number of enrollees are also is also growing. So we need to compensate for that by spending even more and also spending more wisely on education.
So do you mean, JC, because Secretary Pangandaman actually bannered earlier that for the first time, 4% of GDP is going to education? Again, I'm not sure kung basic lang yon or kasama yung CHED and TESDA. But she said that is the UNESCO benchmark, and for the first time ever, we actually made it. Is that enough, or should we, go a bit higher than 4% of GDP for education?
I think I saw some studies, Sean, before that it's actually 6% of GDP. So I'm not sure it's 4. I will also have to fact check what the secretary said. But I think that requires a bit more time because we just received the budget documents, it just got published.
We have a lot of fact checking to do, and this is a question I wanted to ask you: are there enough civil society organizations to really, it's going to be a tedious job going, para kang naging congressman na lang, na rin, diba? To go over this budget and to check on the people we elected to really be faithful to what they're saying.
So yes, I think there was some press conference or some event between some lawmakers as well as civil society organizations who are scrutinizing the budget. But I think we have to be wary of these events, or because we have to make sure that these are not only performative, because remember that the lawmakers themselves are the ones who actually approve the budget, including the dubious budget for 2025. And now they're kind of playing the hero
so
that they're actually...
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. At first, actually, I was quite puzzled by it. It didn't make a lot of sense that they're actually the ones who are actually scrutinizing the budget. They should scrutinize themselves, I think. I think it boils down to that. But civil society organizations, there are some efforts toward more budget scrutiny, but they have to be wary that their efforts are not co-opted or overshadowed by lawmakers as well.
Okay.
Well, JC, speaking of the word you used, performative, President Marcos in his SONA did warn that he will veto any bill that does not align with his proposed budget or the government spending plan. Do you think that will really influence how Congress shapes the budget, or is that just political theater?
Well, I think it boils down to the incentives faced by the lawmakers themselves, who are the ones who are proposing and inserting all of these dubious budgets for flood control, etc. I doubt very much that the president is totally ignorant of all of these shenanigans in the budget process, because at the end of the day, remember that he's the one who signs the budget, diba, by December. And he has the option of actually vetoing some line items that are dubious. Last year, I remember he kind of tried to reduce the budget for flood control projects because there was a bit of an escalation of scrutiny on flood control in particular. But that's a very small proportion of the flood control projects. If you add up all of the flood control projects that he approved, he signed off in the GAA since 2023, it already amounts to 1 trillion pesos, or almost 1 trillion pesos. So that's a lot of money, and needless to say, but I doubt that things will change dramatically this time around, because the lawmakers are in on it, and we face different incentives compared to people who want a sounder budget.
You sound very pessimistic. These are empty words that we've been broadcasting.
But speaking of pessimism, JC, let me just revert to Paui's earlier question about debt servicing. So we're at about 63% debt to GDP ratio right now. Of course, the government says 60 is about a healthy level. But for you guys, for economists, what's actually really a true healthy level? Like, where would you want to see our debt to GDP ratio at?
Well, if you go back to Philippine economic history, back in the days of Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, we were on the precipice of a debt crisis in the early 2000s when the debt to GDP ratio exceeded 70%. So the debt to GDP ratio now is inching up. It's at 63%. Before the pandemic, it was at 39%. So ideally, that's the goal. We should be able to bring down the debt to GDP ratio well below, a bit below 40%. The goal in the persona of President Marcos is to bring it down below 60%, but we're going in the opposite direction because it is increasing. So we should be very wary about this development. And the main problem is that the economy is growing a lot slower these days. It's harder and harder to achieve 6% growth, if you noticed. Nasa bandang 5% lang siya in the past couple of quarters. So this slower growth will mean that the debt to GDP ratio, so it's harder to manage the debt, or the debt will really explode compared to the economy or as the size of the economy if the economy is slowing down. So it boils down to how do we actually accelerate growth in the Philippines? That's a crucial way by which we can analyze the debt.
And finally, were you able to take a look at agriculture? Because this is also a cornerstone of this administration. It promises to increase agricultural productivity. Is there enough spending toward that and giving our farmers, a better lot?
Yes, unfortunately, I haven't really scrutinized the agriculture budget just yet. But based on past GAAs or budgets, a huge chunk of the budget for the Department of Agriculture goes to only rice. So that is a huge problem. We should diversify our agriculture here in the Philippines. There's too many rice-centric policies and programs. And if we want to boost the value of agricultural products, then we should diversify and begin to kind of focus or to shift the focus away from rice, because agri-policy in the Philippines is too rice-centric.
Right. We thank you for your time and wish you luck in scrutinizing the budget even more. That was economist JC Punongbayan.
And we have this breaking news. President Bongbong Marcos has signed Republic Act 12232, which postpones this year's barangay and Sangguniang Kabataan elections. The BSKE will be held instead on November 2, 2026. This law also sets the term of barangay and SK officials to 4 years, with a limit of 3 consecutive terms for barangay officials and 1 term for SK officials. We have more stories coming up after this break. A Chinese jet performs multiple dangerous maneuvers around a Philippine Coast Guard plane earlier today. The details when the big story returns. Stay tuned.
You're watching the big story here on One News. 2 days after Chinese ships collided with the Philippine Coast Guard vessels, returned to Bajo de Masinloc to check on the situation there. The PCG, though, had to stand back after another harassment from Beijing. Gio Robles with the report.
On board Philippine Coast Guard Cessna Caravan aircraft, News 5 joined the PCG's aerial patrol to Bajo de Masinloc. It just took less than a half hour, and we're right there, 1,000 feet above the vast West Philippine Sea. PCG's mission is to look for the Chinese Coast Guard vessel that got wrecked after it slammed its sister ship from the People's Liberation Army. Of course, the PCG also wanted to see the current situation of Scarborough Shoal after Monday's incident. At past 8 a.m., we found USS Cincinnati and USS Higgins destroyer 30 nautical miles from Scarborough Shoal. These are American warships. Even at a distance, we could hear how Chinese Navy 568 tried to get them to leave the area. In so many words, Beijing's PLA said they drove the Americans away. PLA Southern Theater Command insisted USS Higgins destroyer entered without China's permission. But PCG said the U.S. ships were actually conducting freedom of navigation operations over what's clearly part of the West Philippine Sea. But China's everywhere in this part of the sea. We saw about a dozen CCG and militia ships freely roaming the area. In a short while, we arrived at Bajo de Masinloc. But suddenly, a Chinese fighter jet appeared. Shenyang J-15 approached the PCG aircraft at around 200 to 500 feet and repeatedly did dangerous maneuvers.
What makes it more dangerous is that gumagalaw kasi siya. Sometimes it transfers to the left side of the aircraft, sometimes it goes above, sometimes it's on the right side of the aircraft, minsan nasa ilalim din. But the mere fact that the jet fighter is doing such drastic maneuvering without following a safe path, I think that made it more dangerous.
At this point, Chinese warship 553 repeatedly blasted radio challenges to our aircraft. For 20 whole minutes, the Chinese kept an eye on us, apparently insisting we should not proceed. Our pilot had to make the difficult decision to turn around and leave Bajo de Masinloc for now.
One thing is clear, no? Every time we conduct an MDA flight over BDM, they're also harassing and endangering the safety of the Coast Guard aircraft. Well, so far this year, this is the first time that we saw jet fighter intercepting a routine MDA flight being conducted by the Philippine Coast Guard.
For this mission, the PCG did not accomplish what it came to Bajo de Masinloc for: locate the damaged CCG vessel from Monday's collision. But Manila's Coast Guard explained it could be the vessel had already been towed for repairs. For News 5, Gio Robles, We Are One News.
And now let's discuss this with retired Navy Rear Admiral Rmaldez, maritime security expert. Okay, the Chinese seem to be concentrating on Bajo de Masinloc or Scarborough Shoal. Why is that?
Well, Scarborough Shoal is one of the areas that of high interest to the Chinese maritime forces, as well as dito sa may Sandy Cay, saka rito sa Second Thomas Shoal. So, lahat naman yan, meron silang dineploy na mga barko nila para kumbaga ipakita na pinapakita nila na sila may-ari o sila may control ng mga features na yun.
Hindi na Coast Guard, kundi talagang warships, Navy ships ang dinedeploy na nila doon.
Tama po yun, Ces. Hindi naman siya bagong development, no? In a sense na
Jamie, how did you relate to Shrek being a performer for more than 4 decades and this time performing the iconic Shrek? How did you relate to him?
It was very easy to relate to him because syempre parati akong kontrabida. So I always look like the bad guy and therefore I'm always treated like the bad guy. So yung maganda playing Shrek is hindi naman talaga siya bad guy. I just look that way. So I relate to that every day. May mga umiiwas sa akin sa mini staff.
Normally siya limited siya to shadowing actually other naval vessels. Okay? So very unique itong nangyari itong isang araw na incident.
So anong interpretasyon po natin doon na if you're saying unique, is there a change of strategy, becoming more aggressive, trying to cow us from going there?
Okay, ang impact nito, Seth, would be we used to follow yung tinatawag nating white versus white na concept, no? Na ibig sabihin, ang tatapat natin sa kabilang side is yung Coast Guard nila, then ang Coast Guard natin yung kumbaga may depensa sa ating sovereign rights.
Okay.
But this time, they have actively employed yung Navy vessel nila for direct harassment ng Coast Guard vessel natin. So this is a new development and this may require a re-evaluation ng tactics din na ginagamit natin para i-depensa yung ating sovereign right to West Philippine Sea.
Right. The Chief of Staff yesterday said they would be conferring with the President in perhaps a change of approach, a change in strategy. And what would you recommend considering, your experience and background?
Well, first of all, yung sa yan at the operational level, kailangan yung kasi the Coast Guard operates separately from the armed forces in terms of route patrol at operation dito sa West Philippine Sea. So ang first implication niyan is there must be one direction or one operational commander managing this deployment and activity. Both dito sa northern part, which is under and doon sa Palawan, which is the western part.
Right.
So they medyo integrated na. Pangalawa, yung tactics, yung interoperability would have to be more closely coordinated. Let's say, for example, while the Coast Guard is operating in terms of protecting our fisher folks, yung pagbabodyguard o mag-escort sa kanya yung Navy vessels natin. The other option is while yung Coast Guard natin is deployed in a specific area, nakapaikot lang or nagpapatrol yung Navy natin in an adjacent area na nakadeploy yung Coast Guard.
Baka pinapain lang tayo into a bigger, and we're weaker. Baka we're being baited into something that will escalate and we will be caught, not naman flat-footed, but because we're the weaker, we have the weaker force. Is it not a bait into...
That's a possibility, but ang adjustment natin dyan is yung ayusin natin yung rules of engagement natin para yung ating kapitan ng mga barko natin na patrol niya ay nagagabayan sila properly to yung what are the limitations ng actions nila.
Okay, well, sabi nga ni AFP Chief of Staff Romeo Browner, Admiral, na isa sa kanyang isasuggest sa ating Pangulo ay mag-deploy din tayo ng sarili nating warship. Would that be a great idea? Because obviously China would see that as escalatory. And we're talking about Bajo de Masinloc, which is quite near. Hindi siya parang Ayungin na medyo mas malayo, di ba? So parang malapit na to sa ating EEZ.
Pwede naman yun, pero itatandem mo lang kumbaga para sa basketball, ang nakapronta mo yung Coast Guard, nakaback up lang yung Navy. So, in a way, hindi mo ini-escalate yung situation kasi yung first responder mo would still be a white vessel. At least, meron kang Navy doon as yung backup mo in case sila yung nag-escalate ng situation. Meron kang response. But even then, gaya na sinabi ko kanina, meron tayo rules of engagement that would limit yung employment of deadly force. Yun yung escalation na ayaw natin mangyari.
And do you think, just to circle back to yung nagyari na yung banggaan ng barko ng China, yung CCG tsaka yung PLA Navy ship, tinanong ko nga kasi kay Commodore Tariela, Admiral, kung anong magyayari kung hindi nagkabungguan yung dalawa. Posible bang tayo yung nabunggo nun, nung CCG ship?
Well, there is always a possibility kasi based sa description nila, yung maneuver na ginagawa nung PLA Navy tsaka nung Chinese Coast Guard is actually to ipitin yung natin yung Philippine Coast Guard natin in between yung dalawang barko nila. Mabuti na lang at medyo maganda yung diskarte ng kapitan ng barko ng Philippine Coast Guard at naka-alpas siya roon sa yung parang patibong na yun ng dalawang barko nila ng China.
And having said that, yun nga, yung tanong ni Ces, na parang bait ba ito? Kasi kung salpukan po yung barko natin saka yung barko nila, ang next question dyan, Admiral, is of course, is that enough to trigger the MDT with the United States?
I don't think it was a bait. I think it's more of yung I would presume, this assumption ko lang to, normally kasi ginagamit nila yung Coast Guard vessel nila, which is more or less adept at yung that type of activities. So, maaaring yung PLA Navy vessel nila is not adept or hindi niya kabisado yung galaw And yung maneuver niya, hindi niya natimpla na maayos. Kaya actually kung titingnan niyo yung sa video, ang nagkamali ng maneuver doon yung PLA Navy.
Right.
So I think because that was the first time they employed that, and maaari yung kapitan ng barko ng PLA Navy vessel na yun is not familiar with the tactics na ginagamit ng Chinese Coast Guard, medyo sumablay siya doon sa maneuver niya.
Well, let's go to today's incident where the Philippine Coast Guard was, forced to head back because of this harassment by a Chinese fighter jet. So, what if the pilot decided to head on and not turn back?
Ano yan of course, pilot's discretion yan. Pag yung safety na nung aircraft, tsaka safety nung passengers and crew, discretion ng pilot yan, whether ipupursu niya yung mission or not. So ano yan, medyo may calculated risk involved yan eh. Pwede naman niya ituloy kung nakita niya na kaya niyang ipursu pa rin yung mission safely, no? Now since the aircraft involved is yung maritime patrol aircraft ng Coast Guard at saka fighter yung Chinese aircraft involved.
Hindi patas ang laban.
Cessna versus fighter jet, Admiral.
Pwede niya, actually, hindi ako piloto, no, pero pwedeng ibinaba yung aircraft natin to a lower altitude and slow down. Kasi yung fighter operates at a higher speed at a lower speed. I would presume na medyo maghihirapan na yung yung makina niyan. So at a lower speed and lower altitude, we might have a more we might have the advantage in terms of maneuver.
But is it because they're hiding something? Sorry, Paul. Ayaw nilang makita yung scene of the accident where there might be some embarrassing. What could have happened in that condition of it was heavily damaged, correct? The Coast Guard, the Chinese Coast Guard vessel.
That maybe ayaw nilang mapicturan yung salvage operations nila o yung rescue operations nila. That would be a very damaging kung ma-video mo yan. Tapos ma-publicize mo, ma-publicize mo. Siyempre, of course, from a propaganda perspective, medyo kahiya sila ron.
Humiliating.
So that's the reason why they were preventing any approach to that, yung activities nila in terms of salvaging yung damaged vessel.
Sorry, Pawi, go ahead.
Yes, Admiral, I wanted to ask, kasi Commodore Tariela did confirm that there were 2 U.S. naval vessels also spotted near Zambales, and ang sabi, they're conducting freedom of navigation operations. Can you help us understand, Admiral, ano ba itong mga operation na to, freedom of navigation? Because Commodore Tariela did say it also challenges the restrictions on innocent passage imposed by China.
Well, since the 2 U.S. Navy vessels were patrolling in the vicinity of Scarborough Shoal, that is beyond our territorial waters, so nasa exclusive economic zone. Technically, high seas pa rin yan. That means they have all the right under UNCLOS, under Article 19 of UNCLOS, they can exercise the right of passage in that area. Okay, so from a perspective of international law, covered sila, that's walang atraso doon, walang kaso doon. But of course, the Chinese are trying to claim the entire South China Sea. So they treat it as a territorial water. So kaya ang propaganda nila o narrative nila doon, nag-encroach yung US Navy vessels within their territorial waters. Okay? But the point of freedom of navigation is actually to assert it's an assertion patrol to convey a message that under international law, that transit or that passage is allowed. And it's also a challenge to a country like China na mayroong excessive maritime claims na hindi mo pwedeng gamitin yung batas na pinapairal mo kasi labag yan sa international law. So it's both an assertion and a challenge.
Could this be why also there was this more aggressive behavior we've seen in the last couple of days?
Well, maraming factors dyan eh. Number one, na nakita ko kasi, when we approve yung ating Maritime Zones Law, Maritime Zones Law, at yung Archipelagic Sea Lanes Law natin, nag-increase yung nila yung tempo ng kanilang pag-encroach, particular dyan sa area na yan sa Scarborough, saka sa Zambales area. In fact, they have, kumbaga, they put up for their own baseline dito sa Scarborough. So, pang-counter doon sa ating maritime zones. So, ito kasi yung dynamic yan eh. When you put up a law, you must have the wherewithal to actually enforce the law. So dito, sinasabi nila, in a way, sige, ginawa mo yung batas na yan, tingnan natin kung kaya mo enforce yan. So yan yung challenge na nila sa ating mga pinapairal natin mga national laws.
Okay. Finally, well, maliit pa rin ang budget ng AFP dito sa budget na sinubmit ng executive to the legislature. So, anong comment nyo dyan?
Well, ang aking dyan, medyo strategic yung solution ko dyan is i-revive muna natin yung shipbuilding industry natin. Then, we build our ships here. For example, yung sa Coast Guard.
It's a long-term plan, but yes, it's
Selfreliant, defense posture natin.
Oo, para tama po yan. Looks like
sa pollution, we can lease vessels. We can lease civilian vessels and repurpose them. Pinturahan natin ng white or ng gray. Kasi I believe some of the navies that were involved in the anti-piracy patrol sa Somalia, hinulang sila ng asset. What they did was lease a tanker. Tapos they painted it gray. Tapos dineploy nila sa Somalia. So that means maraming commercial vessels yan na idle. We can lease or buy it as a stopgap measure. Importante is we have enough hulls or enough ships to at least assert yung presence natin. So that's one stopgap measure also.
After all, we have shipbuilders in Cebu and I believe in Subic. Navotas, yes. So it's possible.
Yes, and it helps the local economy.
Correct. Well, thank you so much for talking to us. That was retired Navy Rear Admiral Rmaldez. Marami pong salamat.
And in other news, the lower house has started its inquiry over unfinished dredging projects in rivers and waterways in Metro Manila. Caloocan 2nd District Representative Edgar Erice reiterated his claim of corruption in these projects. This is why he says even MMDA's interventions in managing NCR garbage are not working.
Imagine 1.8 million tons of garbage nandyan po sa mga waterways natin. Yung natural waterways natin is the best flood control master plan. Kailangan lang i-enhance, kailangan palalimin, kailangan luwangan. Ang problema, dahil sa allegations of corruption sa dredging, 10 taon na yatang sinuspinde ng DPWH yung dredging ng mga waterways.
At Estero de la Reina in Barangay 290, Binondo, Manila, there's a flood control project already finished last year that is not working. It is a retarding basin project said to be worth more than 90 million pesos, done by St. Timothy Construction Company. This is a firm connected to Sara Diskaya, Pasig City Mayor Vico Soto's opponent in the midterm elections. When asked for comments, Sara's husband, Pacifico Diskaya, just sent a Facebook post insinuating that politicians benefited from the project.
Castro said that government is now also probing possible irregularities in road and bridge projects. She added that President Bongbong Marcos will name more contractors involved in questionable projects very soon.
It's better late than never. Noong mga panahon ba na nakaraang administrasyon, may ginawang ganito? Wala. Kay Pangulong Marcos lang. Bakit? Ngayon nakita yung effect ng flooding . But as of now, we are concentrating on the flood control projects. But I think, susunod pa rin yung iba. Especially yung mga roads, mga bridges, lahat po yan.
And just today, the president's son, House Majority Leader Sandro Marcos, admits that the lower chamber lacks the credibility to probe flood control projects. He said it would be wise and prudent to let the executive take the lead in this investigation.
Why would a body investigate itself? I think it will be primarily the prerogative of the executive to be able to identify where these anomalies lie, given the fact that, again, the accused, so to speak, is within the legislature. I'm not going to tell the members what they shouldn't do. I think, alam mo naman, we're all grown men and women here.
We're pausing for another quick break, but when we return, getting discounted beep cards for students, PWDs, and senior citizens just got easier. That and more when the big story returns. Keep it here.
You're back on the big story. Discounted beep cards for students, persons with disabilities, and senior citizens will be available starting September, according to the Department of Transportation. DOTR Secretary Vince Dizon announced on Wednesday that the special cards valid for the MRT and LRT lines will automatically carry a 50% discount. Students will need to show their student ID, and the cards will be printed instantly at any station. Student beep cards must be renewed every school year, while PWDs and senior citizens can use their cards indefinitely with just one valid ID. Each MRT and LRT station will have a dedicated window for issuing the special cards, and passengers will no longer need to fill out forms to avail of the discount.
Meanwhile, electricity transmission rates are set to increase, and consumers will see the impact in their power bills this month. The National Grid Corporation of the Philippines, or NGCP, says the average transmission rate for July increased by over 9% to 1 peso and 32 centavos in July per kilowatt hour from June's 1 peso and 21 centavos. The adjustment approved by the Energy Regulatory Commission allows NGCP to recover infrastructure investments and implement an under recovery's fixed rate of 3.84 centavos per kilowatt hour around 84 months. The rate change will appear in the August power bill. Charges for ancillary services used to stabilize the grid during peak demand fell slightly to 58 centavos per kilowatt hour, with fees remitted directly to power generation companies. The regulator also approved NGCP's maximum allowable revenue increase of over 6 billion pesos, aimed at strengthening the country's power grid.
And our big picture tonight is for myself and also for all those Swifties out there, young and old. Taylor Swift has announced her 12th studio album, The Life of a Showgirl. The multi-Grammy-winning pop star made the big announcement in a podcast hosted by her boyfriend and football star Travis Kelce. The album's release date is yet to be announced, but pre-order disclaimer on her website says that it will be shipped before October 13. Of course, it had to be 13. And display pictures of Taylor's social media pages were also changed with a blurred visual of the possible album art and glittery orange lock. Taylor also released a Spotify playlist on Tuesday containing her songs produced by Max Martin and Shellback. Swift's new album, which fans called the TS12, will follow her last record-breaking album, The Tortured Poets Department, released in April of 2024. Taylor also ended her record-breaking The Eras Tour just last December. Are you a Swiftie?
I'm more of a believer. Justin Bieber. Diba?
I ganon.
Yeah. What about you?
Justin Bieber, Taylor Swift, or both?
Am I too old to admit that I'm a Swiftie?
No! No. A Swiftie is
Half
from
a Swiftie.
You're a Swiftie, ayan. Sorry, Pawi. Pero,
but yeah, it's always nice to see a new album from Taylor Swift, right? She always makes the best songs.
The best gimmicks.
Best, yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
So excited. Okay, October 13th.
October, malapit na.
Oo, di na lang.
All right, and that's it for the big story this midweek. Thanks for watching.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.
We're back here tomorrow at 7:30. Have a good night, everyone.